Okay, we're live now.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the decision days of myself, Nick Adams-King. I'm the Executive Lead Member for Universal Services, as well as Russell Oppenheimer, the Executive Member for Countryside and Regulatory Services. These decision days are being broadcast in one session live on YouTube via the County Council website. I'd like to welcome the Select Committee Chairman as well. Is Derek here actually? Derek isn't here yet, so Derek no doubt will be joining quite soon, as well as Tim Groves and Louise Parker-Jones, the opposition and independent members, along with officers and anyone watching online. There are no deputations today, so we'll go straight to the first item, and that's about the procurement and installation and maintenance contract, or the procurement of the contract for installation and maintenance of traffic signals and associated equipment. And I think, Patrick, you're going to introduce that.
Thank you, Councillor Adams-King. Yes, welcome. I'd just like to hand over to Adrian Gray, but you're absolutely right. It's the contract installation and maintenance of traffic signals. It's the re-procurement of that contract. And Adrian's just going to cover any of the salient points in the paper before we hand back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Patrick. Just to say that this report is about the retendering of the ITS contract, which expires in July 2024. It's got a value of £14 million, and it includes both the maintenance of that equipment and the re-procurement of new equipment as for our capital schemes. So it includes traffic signals and it includes related equipment, plus other roadside electronic equipment. So, for instance, our road safety flashing amber signs. We've done a lot of work to reduce the revenue costs since the contract was last retendered in 2016. And the current contract gives us a flexibility to deal with expected budget pressures moving forward. And that's probably as much as I need to say about the technical detail, but happy to take any questions.
Super, thanks very much, Adrian, and thanks very much for the report. Let me just check whether Tim or Lou, do you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make? Oh, Tim, sorry, you muted yourself again. You were off mute, but then you went back on.
Thank you. So it's no comments from me, sorry. Thank you.
No, okay.
Thank you very much.
That's super. I'll just check that Derek isn't here yet. No, Derek's not here. So, Russell, anything to say?
No, nothing from me on this one.
All good. So let me just run past the recommendations for you. They're on page 5 of the committee papers or the decision day papers, and they say that the executive lead member for Universal Services, so I give authority to procure, spend and enter into the contractual arrangements for the installation and maintenance of traffic signals and associated equipment for a 4-year, 9-month term with an estimated value of up to £14 million in consultation with the Assistant Director of Legal Services, and that the Director of Universal Services be given delegated authority to agree minor variations to the contract in consultation with the Assistant Director of Legal Services. And so on that basis, I'm very happy to agree that decision. Thanks very much, Adrian, for the report. Sort of important stuff for us all. So the next one is the paper about highways, Highway Network Recovery Strategy Update. I think that's Patrick and Tim this time.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So this is just an update on the Highway Network Recovery Strategy, but in particular, what we're going to cover is the redistribution or the reallocation of funding as part of that. But I'm going to ask Tim just to take through just the headlines of that, if I may. Tim?
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor Adams-King, this paper is a follow-on to the 2 reports that were approved at D-Days last year, specifically the Network Recovery Strategy paper from March 22 and the Highways Inflationary Pressures paper from May 22. So the May paper highlighted significant pressures across the highway service that arose from the sudden and actually quite dramatic rise in the cost of materials and labour. And approval was secured at the time last year to use a proportion of the additional £7 million of highways funding to underwrite the pressure and continue the planned 22-23 programme of work. The forecast pressure at the time was that up to 4.5 million would be required from the 7 million, And the latest projection for the current financial year is that all of that will be required to sustain the remainder of this year's programme. Underwriting the programme in this way has avoided any potential contractual compensation event due to last-minute changes that might have been considered contractually unreasonable. Looking ahead to 23-24, we're in a position where we're able to plan ahead much more effectively in comparison to last year and put measures in place to both optimise service delivery and ensure that we secure value for money from the highways budget. I do need to highlight one thing of significance, and that's the contract price variation values for next year. So for reference, this is an established contractual mechanism that we have within the highway service contract that combines price indexation across all activities, and for capital works for next year, 23-24, the increase is approaching 30%. So in order to demonstrate value for money, I'm seeking approval to review, reprioritise and scale back structural maintenance for next year to ensure we can secure best value across the highways budget while the prices remain so high. We will still need to underwrite an element of next year's programme, and at this stage I estimate that this will require up to 2.5 million from the 7 million. As a consequence of the revised approach, subject to your approval of course, there will be a consequential further delay to the full implementation of the network recovery strategy that came to the exec member in March last year. To be clear though, I do need to stress that nothing that was planned to be done in 23-24 will be cancelled. It will be deferred. And the majority, if not all, of previously committed or promised schemes will still be delivered in 23-24. And finally, the situation with construction-related inflation still remains somewhat fluid, but there is emerging confidence that we may start to see some recovery in inflation and consequently the contract price indices for 24-25. But my team will be undertaking a further review in the autumn, and if necessary, we will bring a further paper to you with an update later this year.
That's very clear, Tim. Thanks very much. Obviously, with the so many of our costs being linked to commodity prices, it makes sense for us to hang on and see how that changes over the coming year, and hopefully with things getting back to normal with global supply chains, and finding ways around the war in Ukraine and China re-entering the market, then the volatility that we've seen might well be coming to an end, or at least lessening a bit. So it makes sense to me for us to take our time and make sure that we're spending money as effectively as possibly can. Tim, Lou, have you got anything that you'd like to add? Lou first, yes.
Thank you. All I wanted to say was it's really disappointing that we are still facing these problems with that money which members, voted through for improvements having to be reallocated because of inflation. I'm under no illusion that our officers are facing really difficult times when actually, like everybody across the whole of the country, is facing problems. But it is depressing that our money is going on that and not for what it was intended. I said last May that I was concerned that we would be facing a similar situation this year, and again we are facing a similar situation, and I'm concerned that though some things might peter out in terms of the inflation, that costs have a tendency to always creep up, and by delaying some projects they will inevitably end up costing us more and more as time progresses. So that's all I wanted to mention, is that I am concerned, and I don't think this is what members had in mind when we initially approved that 7 million at all. And I know it's not an easy decision, but I thought I should mention it. Thank you.
No, I think that's a really reasonable point, and you're absolutely right. This is not what we imagined we'd be doing, and unfortunately, it's the world in which we find ourselves at the moment. Tim, you wanted to say something as well?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, to reinforce what Lou's already said, but I'm very concerned about the reduction in service to residents. Delaying operation and resilience and structural maintenance. And it is going to be difficult to catch up. And, we're saying we're delaying it, and yes, they will be delivered next year. Will we have another report in a year's time that says the same thing? Very concerned about that. And can we guarantee that that won't happen? Thank you.
Thanks. Tim, did you want to come back on either of those 2 points, or?
Thank you, Councillor Adams-King. Nothing much I can say really, other than to support what both members have said. It is disappointing for officers as well that we're not able to take full advantage of the extra 7 million, but we're just victims of the global situation, unfortunately. And one thing about the construction industry, and it's a bit like fuel prices really, that fuel prices go up quickly but rarely come down quickly. And it's the same in the construction industry, that the prices have gone up quite rapidly, but it may take some time for those prices to recover. We do talk to senior people within the contracting industry, and as I said, there is some confidence starting to emerge that it may take a year plus, but we will start to see a recovery. Now, if you were to ask me whether inflation or prices will ever recover to where they were pre-Ukraine, I think that's unlikely, but it's possible, because the contract price variation mechanism that we use, whilst it's positive and high for next year, it can go negative as well. That's not unheard of. So we're just keeping very close to the industry and keeping check of what's happening.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Russell, did you want to add anything to this one?
Thank you, Nick. Just briefly, I want to say how mindful all councillors are that inflation combined with severe weather challenges puts a huge strain on all of the highways engineers on the front line. And I know that a lot of the back office engineers and designers have been out on the front line over the last few weeks, triaging potholes. It's been all hands to the pump. Councillors do really appreciate the dedication and hard work of the highways team at this difficult time. And we do very much acknowledge, as you've heard, that inflation is a real challenge, because it's a real terms cut in budgets. And when you combine that with everything else that you've had to deal with, it is really difficult. And what I'm so impressed by is how you keep your spirit up, Tim. All of your team, they keep their spirit up. They're always friendly. They're always helpful. They always are willing to do whatever they can. And we really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer. Very much appreciate those words.
Yeah, I'm sure that all 4 of us, or the 3 of us who haven't said anything, would absolutely echo that, Tim. And it's been particularly the last week we've had has been a particularly challenging week for all of you, and we're really grateful to everything that everyone's done just to keep everybody safe over that week and also keep things moving. It is a really tricky situation. It's a really helpful and interesting report and update. The good news, I suppose, is that we're having to send less of the 7 million this year towards the capital programme than we did last. So that's a positive. At the end of the day, it is public money, and we have to make sure that we're spending it wisely. And if there is an opportunity for us to do things in a more efficient manner by holding on, although it's hugely disappointing, I completely understand what Tim and Lou have said. We are all in the same situation where we would love to get on with this work straight away. It is the right thing to do and to wait. And so I'm very happy, therefore, to agree that decision. Thank you. We've now got 3 financial items. Patrick and Maria are going to talk about the capital programme for Q3 to begin with, I think.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams-King. Before I hand over to Maria, just to say this is the Q3 update. So later on, we've got the 3-year capital programme, then we're going to follow with a revenue report on that one. So I'll hand over to Maria, please.
Afternoon all. So this is the Q3 report, the usual quarterly report that includes a high-level summary of progress and delivery within the capital programme in this financial year, 22-23. And the main recommendation, the only recommendation, is that for you to note the latest progress in the delivery of the Transport and Environment Capital Programme this year. There's a lot of information in the report. We've already discussed inflation, and it does obviously outline the high inflationary levels seen in the construction market, and that they continue to have a financial impact on the whole of the Transport and Environment Capital Programme. It also details a range of measures to manage the price and delivery pressures, which include using departmental LTP resources, greater Section 106 where possible, if the terms align with the use, requesting additional funding from the Corporate Inflation Reserve, and also descaling and value engineering where possible. There's a lot of information in the report. The finance and expenditure section shows that the spend up to the end of October, there's a long lead time to this report, but for those first 7 months was £56 million. And we've undergone a review of the payments profile for the rest of the financial year. And based on this review, the spend trajectory to date or rather the predicted outturn is likely to be slightly lower than last year. It'll probably be in the region of £105 to £110 million. There's some good news in there as well in terms of our progress. The structural plan maintenance sub-programme continues to progress well at the end of Q3, despite a very wet October and November. They had ordered 97% of schemes, and 62% have been delivered this year. In terms of major schemes as well, we've seen the completion of capacity improvements at the M27 Junction 9, and the first Transforming Cities Fund schemes have now been completed, with bus improvements delivered in Porchester. So I think it's the first of two capital programme reports, so I think I'll conclude the summary there.
Thanks very much, Maria. And thanks for so much for all the information and for all of the work going into this, because it's a huge piece of work, I know. Lou, Tim, have you got anything you'd like to add to this one?
No, just really to thank you for the report, and a very informative report. Thanks for the work on it, and no special comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Super, thanks. Russell?
Oh, just thank you for the report, and I'm glad to see there's going to be some new minibuses for the Dial-A-Ride. Those will be very welcome in communities across Hampshire.
Indeed. And it's good to see that we're beginning to deliver on some of the improvements down in around Portsmouth for transforming cities as well. I went and looked at one of the bus improvements down there, and it's certainly helping transport between Fareham and Portsmouth quite a bit, so that's all good. So this report, I'm sorry, last paper I forgot to tell you where the recommendations were, but this is on page 21, and the recommendation is at paragraph 2. It asks me to note the progress, which I'm very happy to do, and confirm that decision. Thanks so much. And so then it's the proposed capital programme for universal services, which is a bit more meaty, I suppose, and far more complex.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Adams-King. Can I just introduce this, and I'll hand over to colleagues to take through the detail. But all I was going to say with this one is this really brings together the former Culture, Communities and Business Services and the former Economy, Transport and Environment capital programmes into a single report. So you'll see an overarching covering report for the capital programme for universal services for 3 years, with then the underlying reports for CCBS and ETE. And so I've got a number of colleagues lined up just to talk through just very high level points on those. So I'm going to, Jenny has the overarching view from a finance business partner perspective, but we've also got Maria and Rebecca Thompson to cover respectively the former ETE and the former CCBS side, but we'll keep it relatively brief by way of detail. Thank you.
So, super. I don't know who wants to go first. Who fancies going first?
Maria, would you like to take us through the former ETE one, please? Then we can hand over to Rebecca, please.
That's fine. I was expecting Jenny to go first with the overarching report, but I'm happy to go ahead. So this is the annual 3-year report. As you mentioned, it's the former ETE report. It comes to decision day every January. It sets out the funding sources and proposals for the capital programme for the sub-programmes, which are structural maintenance, integrated transport, waste, flood risk and coastal defence, and also community transport. It has 3 appendices, and there are lots of tables within the report as well with the information under each sub-programme. There are 5 recommendations. It's an ambitious programme against what I think is fair to say a fairly pessimistic funding backdrop. The programme at the moment relies heavily on competitively bid grants, and it should be noted that the funding has not been secured for close to half of the integrated transport, £52 million. As these relate to external bids that are yet to be confirmed. Obviously, members will be aware of the Levelling Up Fund announcements that were made on Friday as well. At the moment, we will retain these schemes that those relate to because there are future funding bids as well, so we'll try and take advantage of those. In compiling the 3-year outlook, the provisional allocations are reviewed and schemes are adjusted or in some cases removed from the future years programme. So I think I'll leave it at that level, if that's okay, because there's a lot of information.
That's fine. Maria, I'm sorry, we just threw you into the breach because we lost Jenny for a minute there.
Ah, I'm with you.
So, she is now back though.
Apologies, all IT died, I'm afraid.
Yeah, we kind of gathered that's what had happened, Jenny. So Maria very, very kindly just stepped in and did her bit, but over to you for the overarching part.
Yes, I think Patrick has probably covered most of it now, actually. So just to say the capital programme, as Patrick has said, is the combined former ETE and CCBS papers. So I think that is really all I wanted to say, and we probably are best to continue with Maria. Apologies for the build-up, isn't it, for something that wasn't that exciting at all.
No, okay. No, that's all good. So in which case it's Rebecca's turn, I think. Please, Rebecca.
Thank you, Councillor Adams-King. Just so the second part of the report covers the former Culture, Communities and Business Services department, and the primary focus of the funding allocations within the programme is the condition-based repair and maintenance of the County Council's built, rural and maintained schools assets, which comes within the remit of property and countryside services within the new Universal Services Directorate. The report, not dissimilar to the highways position, highlights the significant inflationary cost pressures that we are experiencing within the construction and maintenance sectors. And due to this, there are recommendations to increase the value of a number of specific named schemes in the capital programme, both through a combination of inflation cost increases and also development of the scheme scopes through the design process. You will also see that in the report there is some funding identified for investment to enable the continued transformation of services and assets to support income generating services, and also investment to reduce energy costs and carbon emissions from both the County Council's estate and our vehicle fleet. And the recommendations at the beginning of the report, there's a number of recommendations around approval of the increased values, in addition to the programme, as well as the approval of the overall programmes for future years.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think a couple of things to say. The first is to my colleagues, and particularly to Tim and Lou. Obviously, this is a dynamic piece of work, and it's been an enormous piece of work for Maria and Rebecca and Jenny to pull together, because you're effectively beginning to amalgamate the new department together. And I'm sorry this morning that we were finding our way a bit in the scrutiny element of this in the committee to look at it. This is something that we will settle down to looking at. To give you some comfort, it's been part of both the two committees' work in terms of the old CCBS and the old ETE committees over time. And so I recognise, though, that it's something that we need to probably keep an eye upon and come back and talk about at another point once we are a little better settled into our new role. The other thing I want to say leading on from that is actually to say thank you to all of you who have pulled this together, because it is an enormous piece of work. It's a big enough piece of work keeping an eye on the capital programme in a normal year. But when you're having to pull together elements of 2 previous departments as we've created universal services, as we begin to move forward, there are some enormous benefits to doing that, but it brings with it inevitably a huge amount of work. And I'm really grateful to you for all of this. It makes complete sense to me. And the fact that it does so is testament to how hard you've worked to make it accessible and readable to us all. So thank you. Tim, Lou, I don't know whether you'd like to say anything around this. Tim.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, just thank you very much for the work. Again, a comprehensive report about the capital programme. Very useful. I'm pleased to see the scheme for the increased thermal performance for 2 schools is in the programme. So I just noticed that, obviously something we weren't expecting to see the report until we realised what we were looking at this morning. And also just a clarification on one issue to do with culture. Are we right in assuming that Titchfield Haven House is assumed for selling in the programme, even though I think, from what I understand, the select committee, a lot of members and local people were not in favour of that taking place? Thank you.
That might be a question for Russell to answer, possibly.
Well, I think I'll defer to officers on that one.
Okay.
Right, Councillor Adam King, shall I bring Jo Heath on the call here? And I think Jo is probably best placed to answer this, given she's led on most of this work. If I may, can I hand over to Jo, just to give us an update?
Jo popped up on my screen and I suddenly realised that's who I should be asking. Sorry, Jo.
Absolutely fine. Thank you. As members are aware, at the moment we have got approval to go ahead and sell both Titchfield Haven House. However, as it's been declared an asset of community value, and as there has been an expression of interest in a different proposal coming forward from the community or from another organisation, we have a moratorium on selling it for a further 6 months. The inclusion here is to enable us to procure works should we be in a position to be able to sell the property once that moratorium has ended.
Does that help, Tim?
Yes, thank you very much. That helps to clarify. Thank you.
Super, thanks. Lou.
Thank you very much. My question's more around the environmental aspects, because I fully understand that each project will have its own environmental impact probably conducted upon it. But it's very hard when we look at these reports, other than things which are very specifically outlined as being environmental enhancements, whether that be with the schools, but actually all our buying power has massive implications for the environment and for climate change in particular. But we don't get that when we read financial reports. So there's nothing in there that tells us about the implications of all these decisions we're taking collectively, how that will be either contributing to carbon or reducing it. And I think it would have been really helpful if we could see more of that going forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Obviously, having declared a climate emergency, it's something that upon which everybody is focused. I don't know, I'm not sure that there's quite an answer to that, unless anyone wants to add anything from the officer side. But I suspect it's something that we could look at, and in the same way that we look at equalities and diversity in our papers, perhaps begin to look and see whether there is an impact upon carbon and our climate commitments. We can take that one away and take a look at it for you, Lou. Russell, would you like to add anything to this bit?
I'll just briefly say I do endorse the Universal Services former CCBS capital programme, and it is going to be very important to us because there's a lot of allocation there that's related to transformation programmes for things like our country parks and our outdoor centres. And those are really important actually for the financial sustainability of this new department. So from my perspective, I endorse that side of the report 100%.
Super, thanks. And obviously there are quite a number of different pieces of work from the old ETE around highways in here, but there are also some that you might expect to see here and that aren't. And some of those sort of larger capital programs still sit within, or now sit within the Hampshire 2050 bit. So that's why perhaps if you're looking through all of the different individual details that some of them are missing. So the recommendations for this paper on pages 39 and 40, and there are 9 different paragraphs and recommendations from 2 to 10. I'm not going to read them out to you because we'd be here for a long time. But just to say, I'm very happy to agree those. And thank you once again, everyone, for all your hard work on this, because I recognise it's been a very big task to put it all together. And that's been great. So final financial paper for this afternoon is about revenue budget rather than capital. Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Adams-King. So this is the first of the Universal Services revenue budget, the first one that's been created. And I was just going to give an overview that it's been created from all the services that have come together under Universal Services. Some of those services were split between different directorates from the former CCBS and ETE. Some have moved into different areas, but this represents all of the cash limit from all the services that now sit within Universal Services. There is an overarching envelope, and because the new directorate is still very much in its early stages, there may be some tweaking that we need to do because it's come together quite quickly, but it will all be tweaked within the envelope that's already there. So the figures will remain the same. But if I just hand over to Jenny, who's going to just take us through some of the salient points of that. Jenny?
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, so the budget setting report for 2023-24, the first part of the report sets out the wider financial context for Hampshire County Council, very much mirrors the December Cabinet update, so should look very familiar. Then the remainder of the report sets out the position for Universal Services in particular. It is just a budget setting exercise within the provisional cash limits that was set in December. So although this is the year in which the SB23 savings come out of the budget, there are no new savings. It's the savings that have been approved from prior reports. Also worth adding, because we're operating in an environment of very high inflation at the moment, there is quite a lot of inflation that has gone into the budget. So overall, we have seen a slight net increase in the net budget. The report then goes on to set out the particular budget challenges and priorities that the Directorate will need to focus on over the coming year to make sure we stay within that cash limit. Yeah, as Patrick has said, actually, it is worth knowing that although the budgets are stated for Universal Services, there will be a little bit of fine-tuning as we go forward, just to work out the finer details and nuances of the restructure. That was really all I wanted to say as an overview.
No, and pretty much all of the above gets repeated this time about all of the work and putting it together. Obviously, this is one though where revenue updates have gone to the respective executive members. So for Russell and myself and Edward previously in the autumn. So it's an amalgamation of different things. But thank you for all of the work in putting it together. And again, it made sort of complete sense to me. As you said, there'll be a bit of fine-tuning yet to be done, and I think we learned that this morning in again the select committee in looking at things there. Tim, Lou, on the light of that, anything that you'd like to add on this one? Nope. All good. Okay. Russell, anything here for you?
I don't actually have anything to add on this paper.
This is very much a business as usual one. I should have said with this one and with the previous paper as well. These are items that then go on to Cabinet and Council for their approval. So we'll be doing that. I'm very happy to agree these recommendations again. They are on page 103, and there are 2 recommendations at points 2 and 3. So very happy to agree that decision. And thank you once again for all of your hard work in pulling that together for us. And so we've just moved on then to the Parish Lensman Scheme, which is again a Patrick and Tim co-production, I think.
Thank you, Councillor King. So this is a report on the Parish Lensman Service. It's about the planned withdrawal of the current funding provision, but actually with the use of external funding to deliver the service in 23-24. I'm going to just pass over to Tim, who's just going to cover the key points of the paper and then take questions. Tim? You're mute, Tim.
No, I don't think he's muted. I think he's... No, it's still not. You'll have to tell us about it, Tim, through the medium of interpretive dance. That's better. We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. I'll just turn my volume up. Apologies for that. My headphones failed. Yeah, I think you've shared the highlight, Patrick, there. One thing I will stress, Councillor Adams-King, that under the proposed alternative funding model, which will enable the scheme to be supported for at least 1 more year, nothing will change on the ground. So the service that we currently deliver will continue, and that will include the work that the parish lensmen do on rights of way. The scheme is very popular. We've got 186 parishes and town councils that currently participate, and they all receive at least £1,000 per year. Probably worth highlighting that we do have some parishes that have a slightly different arrangement with the county council, whereby they don't receive any funding, instead funding their lensmen through increased local precept or similar. And just one final thing from me, whilst the paper is only seeking approval to continue with the scheme for 1 more year only, there is a longer term option to continue the scheme beyond 23-24 using the same alternative funding model, while Milestone remain County Council's highway maintenance delivery partner, essentially utilising annual funding provided by them to support local community initiatives. And this is something that we will be discussing with you over the coming months. Nothing more to add.
That's super. Thanks very much. I think it's really important just to emphasise, because I've now had a couple of queries from parishes that they've seen the headline of this report in terms of the parish lensman scheme stopping, and have not quite understood that it is continuing, but continuing in a slightly different format, initially for that 1 year, but we have the commitment to take it on beyond that. Representing a parished area myself, I know how well used it is and how vital it is to a lot of the parishes to get those small jobs done around the piece. And I look forward to establishing that relationship with Milestone to run the system, and also hopefully to see it expand a little to provide a slightly different range of expanded range of things to do as well as we go on. That's a conversation for later this year with them. But if you're watching from a parish and are wondering about this, just to reassure you, it is absolutely continuing. Sorry, Tim, you wanted to say something.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That's very helpful, and also to understand that you intend to continue it beyond the first year, because that would be my concern, that it's 1 year only and then it all gets withdrawn for commercial reasons or for whatever reason. So I think that is important, that we do understand whether it is going to continue, whether that's part of our plan or it isn't part of our plan. Also, just to mention, some parishes don't yet receive any funding from this scheme, but I do note that Tim spoke to me after a previous select committee offering, for example, to consider the parish that I represent, whether we could get funding, which I haven't taken him up on yet. So just a sort of clarification that that will be possible going forward.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Groves, and perhaps we can discuss that outside of this session.
Super, thanks. Lou, did you want to add anything? No. Russell?
Right, just echo what you said, Nick. That this will, if you make this decision to accept this recommendation, be very welcomed by parishes in rural divisions such as ours. And I have an email ready to go as soon as your decision is made to alert the clerks in my parishes about this, because it'll be very welcome to them.
Yeah, I'll be doing the same thing. And I think you and I are in the similar situation of having quite a few parishes and equally being envious of Tim just having one, which is an interesting situation for us. And Tim, just to clarify for you, your point about the continuation for a year. The reason it's continuing for a year is that it then aligns itself with the extension to the milestone contract. That's why it's just initially for a year, and then the contract extension comes into play, and that's where it starts again, if that makes sense. So that's why we're just talking about a year here and then saying we know that it's going to be continuing, because it's part of that arrangement. So the recommendation for this one is, or the two recommendations, they're on page 123 at points 2 and 3. I'm very happy to agree those. Tim, thanks very much for all the work you've done in sort of finding this solution for us, because I think it's a really good and sustainable solution going forward, and it shows excellent partnership working with Milestone to bring that forward. And I know the parishes throughout the county will be happy with that. That I think pretty much ends my bit of the decision day. Oh, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. We've got one more thing to do. I'm really sorry. So there's an issue that we need to just talk about, which is appointments to outside bodies. So in light of recent cabinet and responsibility changes, there are 2 joint partnerships that we need to alter the membership on. And so I can confirm that I am going to replace Jan Warwick on the Project Integra Strategic Board, and Deputy Leader Ros Chad will replace Edward Heron as a deputy. And I'm also going to replace Edward on the Solent Transport Partnership, and Russell will be taking over from Jan as the deputy on that as well. So I'm not sure if that's a decision that I have to say. I've decided that, but it seems a bit odd to be deciding about myself, but that's what we're going to be doing. Just as a point of clarification, I had previously been the Project Integra rep from Test Valley, so to confirm that I'm stepping down from that, and that's a decision that will be confirmed at Test Valley's full council, which is on Wednesday evening, so I'm not going to get 2 votes on it. And then one other decision to be made, which is about Chief Officer Delegation, the Chief Officer Delegation Register. Patrick and
Thank you.
Harry.
Thank you. So this is really just a formality where delegations previously existed to the directors of the former Economy, Transport and Environment and the former Culture, Communities and Business Services. And because they no longer exist as departments, this is just a delegation to the Director of Universal Services, to me. And so it's formalising that process, please.
Super, thanks. I'm guessing there's not much to say on this one, everybody. We're all quite happy with it. The recommendations are on page 133 at points 1.1 and 1.2, and I'm very happy to agree those, and that really is the end of my decisions now. Russell, your turn.
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Russell Oppenheimer. I am the Executive Member for Countryside and Regulatory Services, and I'd like to thank you for attending my virtual decision day today, which is continuing to be webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. I also have no deputations, so we can go straight to my first item, which is agenda item 9 on the agenda, Chief Officer Delegations Register, similar to the previous item. And I'd like to ask Patrick to present this item, please.
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer. Again, very similar to the previous item, this is really just formalising the previous delegations that existed to the former Economy, Transport and Environment and Culture, Communities and Business Services. to the new director, me, of Universal Services. So it's just a formality of those delegations, please.
Yeah, well, as with the previous item, I doubt anyone's got any major burning points to make about this. It is a formality, but please put your hand up now if you do wish to say anything. But yeah, it's absolutely accepted, and I'm happy to approve this recommendation, please, Katie. That takes us on to my final item, which is an exempt item. So before we continue, I do now have an exempt report to consider. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for observing before reading the formal exclusion of press and public, which is something I'm required to do. And I'm going to read that now. So the exclusion wording is this: that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following item of business, as it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during this item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information within paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. And further, that in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemptions outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the reasons set out in the report. So having read that and being satisfied that it is correct that we move into exempt session, I'd like to ask Katie if you could stop the webcast, please.
No problem. I will confirm when we have stopped.